All right, folks. Hey, I am very excited to introduce our next speaker. And as I said, we're now dedicated on one track and one track only. We're going to have Rob be sharing us about organizational change. This is a talk I've been dying to get for several years. There are huge fields of study on organizational change. How do you change an organization's culture? How do you change organizational behavior, how the way people think and act? But I've never been able to find the right speaker to come in and share with us that wealth of knowledge at an organizational level. I mean, why reinvent the wheel, folks? We're good at security, but we're struggling with organizational change. Let's go to the organizational change experts. And it not only is Rob an expert in this field, he's not a security expert, he's an organizational change expert, but he's a fantastic speaker, and you're going to see some really dynamic engagement here. So Rob, I have no idea what you have coming our way, but bring it on. I'm dying to see. All you.
Okay, perfect. So good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. I guess depends where you are located. So if you are in this session, you are in the session for how to leverage change, how to go from cyber attack to cyber safe, and really leverage behavioral change to build your security awareness program or your strategy. So if you're here, you are in the right place. But I will preface this session by saying, I speak very quickly. And I recognize that you're probably thinking, oh my God, he's talking so fast. So like many people have told me my whole life, Rob, it's not you, it's me. So I'm telling you, it's not you, it's me. I do speak quickly, but I made a little post-it to say, slow down. As well, I'm going to make a recording of this session available with some of my notes at the end of the session, and I'll share with you how I will do this. Also, for this session, we will be using the Slack chat hallway feature. So make sure you are on Slack because we are definitely going to make use of this. So my hallway is hashtag hallway-rob-Oddi. So we are definitely going to be making use of that. So let's get into it. First and foremost, I'll start off with a question that has nothing to do with behavioral change or security awareness. Does anyone recognize this airline? And if you do, you could write it in the chat, all right, on the Slack, not on Zoom, but on thing. Someone wrote, yes, yes. Okay, well, Michael, do you know who it is? If you don't, it's not Anna Airlines. This is All Nippon Airways. So they're an airline based out of Japan. And I think back in 2010, perhaps 2011, they had a challenge. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to reduce their carbon footprint by 5 tons every 30 days. So every 30 days, they want to reduce their carbon footprint by 5 tons. So knowing that, you might think to yourself, well, there's 2 obvious things they can do. Number one, they can procure more energy efficient aircraft, right? You have more energy efficient aircraft, it reduces your carbon footprint. And of course, the other thing they can do is get rid of their least profitable routes. However, they didn't do either of those. And what they found is that the answer to this question of reducing their carbon footprint by 5 tons every 30 days could be found in one small area of the aircraft. So in the Slack channel, if you think you know what that one small area of the aircraft is, you can write it there and I'll take a look at it. Let's see what people are saying. Remove the magazines, the lavatory. Yes, Aliha, and I probably mispronounced that. You are correct. They realized that the answer to this challenge could be found in the washrooms. What Nippon Airways or the leadership team realized is that if the average passengers have a bladder capacity of 15 ounces and 150 people on the plane use the restroom, that's 64 kilograms or 141 pounds of added weight. So here's the thing. All of you on this chat, all of you on this call, in this session, you are on the leadership team of Nippon Airways. In the Slack room, what I'd like you to do is this. I'd like you to tell me how you would answer this question, and nothing is off the table. You could be as innovative as you'd like. How do you get passengers to use the washroom less or not even at all? So again, you're on the leadership team of Nippon Airways. Tell me, nothing is off the table, no holds barred. How would you get passengers to use the washroom less or not all? So we have less beverages, lock the door, lock the door, lovely. Remove the beverages, no snacks, out of order sign, wow. Remove the wow, you guys are like savage, right? No drinks, don't serve beverages. Well, let's find out what they did. And in fact, Nathan had the right answer. So, airline asks the passengers to use the toilet before boarding so that they will weigh less and help cut carbon emissions. Congratulations, Nathan. You answered it correctly first. So, why is this important? Or rather, why did I bring up this case study at the beginning of this session? So here you had Alan Nippon Airways, who had like a business challenge. They had an opportunity, but yet the answer wasn't found in some complicated business strategy or SOPs, or even through technical upgrades or infrastructure. In fact, the answer to this challenge was through getting people to change their behavior. And by getting people to change their behavior, specifically their customers and their pre-boarding behavior, they could achieve their business outcomes. So many of you are here because you're launching or responsible for launching a security awareness program that really create change in the organization. But as you'll learn, organizations actually don't change. It's the people who do. And really, that's what this session's about. How do you approach security awareness, not from the lens of IT or business or as a project manager, but from the lens of behavioral change, specifically from an organizational change management perspective. So for those who do not know me, my name is Rob Oddi. I'm a change and human development expert. I do consulting, speaking, workshops, executive coaching. I work with the best of the best to accelerate strategy, increase the likelihood of change, and really get people talking about what matters most. And of course, you can find me on www.roboddi.com. So when it comes to security awareness, really what matters most is how do we change behaviors to minimize risk? Because, I might be preaching to the choir here, some of you. At the end of the day, really security awareness is really all about minimizing human risk. And if you think about it, for the last, I'm not an IT guy per se, but I'd say 10, 20, 30 years, companies have spent millions of dollars beefing up infrastructure, and when you look at report after report, for example, the Verizon database, data breach investigations report, most of the cyber attacks or the majority of incidents, if not breaches, are the result of human error. Right? So someone clicked on something, some data was left at risk or so forth. And look, you can implement the best security awareness program, top of the line phishing campaigns, but if people don't adopt the behaviors that your organizations need, you're kind of like pouring money down the drain. So we're going to talk about this and we're going to go into a bit more detail. But before we do that, I think there's a few things to know when it comes to changing behaviors. And I bring these up because I really believe these are foundational to whatever you will be doing in security awareness. And I call these the cold hard truths about change because they're based on my experience in doing change for over 20 years. And I want to start with a quote. And the quote is, even a baby with a wet diaper wants changing, but even then it cries through the process. So let's talk about cold hard truth number one. First and foremost, look, change is deceivingly difficult, right? And I know you're saying, of course, Rob, but it's true. Our natural reaction to change as humans is what? It's resistance. So, whether it's someone giving us advice or something similar, we tend to resist unless we individually have sort of that aha moment, that insight that helps us generate change. But generally, change is so difficult. And with that in organizations, what we often see is that leaders often underestimate what is actually required to transform behaviors. And very often in companies, you'll have these sort of behavioral change initiatives, but they're often given to an IT manager, a director, or someone from the business, right? Someone who may not have expertise in change. But more often than not as well, it tends to be treated like a project. So, I've seen so many project managers try to manage change projects, but here's a distinction. Project managers are people from the business for the most part. Their goal is often implementation. But from an organizational change perspective, our goal is always adoption. So two different goals. So leaders often underestimate what is actually required to change behavior. So cold, hard truth number 3.
700. C.
Yeah, there are 2 C's. Wow. Okay.
I saw.
Well, that'd be a good idea. Yeah.
Mythological hero Achilles.
That.
Okay.
Shelby.
I'll solve.
Yeah.
Mythological hero Achilles.
Yeah, that's it. Oh boy. Well.
So here, cold hard truth number 3 is the right answer is not enough. Look, for anything you're doing in a company, an organization, often, they'll put a lot of budget towards something. They'll hire the best consultants. They'll have tons of leadership and sponsorship. But at the end of the day, if people don't really adopt the behaviors you're requiring, what's the point? So people or companies can always have the right answer, but that on its own is not enough. I can give you the best advice, but it's the best advice. But if you don't follow it, that advice is completely useless. Cold hard truth number 4 seems obvious, but sometimes it's not. And it's this: organizations don't actually change. They don't. It's the people who do. So when you think of your company or major changes that have happened in your organization, there's generally 3 stages, right? The first stage is the current state, and that's where we are today. And then there's the transition state where you've started enacting some quick wins, some small things to move, but you're not fully there. And of course, the future state is when the changes are realized. So similar to how organizations go through change, us as humans go through the same thing. We have our current state, which is how we do things today. We have a transition state and we have a future state. So think of it like this. A current state might be, I'll use phishing as an example because a lot of organizations start off with that, with security awareness. So current state is people do anything when it comes to email, click on links. There's really nothing there. Transition state is, maybe they're starting to recognize how to spot the signs of phishing. And the future state is, not only do they recognize the signs of phishing, but they know not to open emails, click on links. And in fact, they'll report suspicious emails to the service desk. So why am I telling you this? So for an organization to achieve change, that future state, it's not going to happen unless individuals collectively have all gone through their personal states. So the majority of individuals have to actually reach their future state before an organization achieves their future state. So again, organizations don't change, it's the people who do. And my last point when it comes to the cold hard truth about change, it's this: communications is not what we want people to know, but rather how we want them to feel. Because feeling a certain way helps people take specific actions, and that action could be necessary to adopt the behaviors that you set out. At the end of the day, logic is really how most organizations communicate. And my mentor said to me one time, he's like, Rob, logic makes people think, but it's emotion that makes people act. And look, it's 2021. People are influenced by Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, I'd say TikTok, but I think I'm too old to even understand how TikTok or Snapchat works. And really, they've been conditioned to sort of tune out when you give them content that's dry, boring, because content really is king, right? So corporate speak really doesn't cut it anymore. And I could do a whole keynote on digital engagement and all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, it's all about creating powerful engagement, having people see themselves in your communications and engagement, and really doing things where you're gamifying, creating aha moments, and generating that insight. And really, you have to reach people where they are. And that includes knowing how they like to be communicated to. So again, communication is no longer about what you want people to know. It's how about what you want them to know and feel, and ideally the actions they'll take. So that being said, with the cold hard truths, one of the challenges that organizations often face when they're doing security awareness is they tend to focus on individual tools or activities, but they often don't see the bigger picture. And as someone who gets brought in to speak to a lot of organizations on change and security awareness, I often hear the same thing. Oh, we've launched a phishing campaign, or we're doing compliance training, or we're doing this for Cybersecurity Awareness Month. But the problem is the focus tends to be action or deliverable based, and it's rarely cohesive and often lacks the bigger picture or bigger goal direction. And research tells us that organizations who use like a structured approach when it comes to change and focus less on technology and on less components and more on sort of a change-based approach, generally those are the ones who succeed. So why am I telling you this? Well, earlier this year, I developed a framework that's really based on my experience working in change for over 20 years. And it aligns with how one can do security awareness in their organization or even apply it into sort of security awareness. And I call this the CyberSafe Framework and Accelerator. And the CyberSafe Framework and Accelerator is a foundational model, 5-phased approach that puts specific tasks, mechanisms, and action in unique stages. And what's great about it is there isn't necessarily one starting point. Like, you can begin at any point depending where you are in your program. However, you can or should ideally start at one of the points. And we're going to talk about these and talk about the different objectives and questions you have to ask. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to highlight some of the key phases and some of the questions that you should be asking when it comes to this framework and accelerator. So ideally, one of the things you should be doing first and foremost is assessing risk, right? And assessing risk is really about focusing on understanding where you are as an organization in relation to risk. So every organization's risk level is different depending on the nature of your business and industry. The types of threats you see in retail, look, you might be dealing with payment card information, but then if you're working in healthcare, you might be dealing with personal information, personal health information. So it's important to understand how to assess risk as a starting point, because if you don't know where your risks are, what are you doing a security awareness program for? Now, granted, there are a lot of companies that will start off by doing a compliance only perspective. And I think a lot of you guys have seen sort of SANS security maturity model. But look, I'm not convinced that doing the bare minimum is often the best approach. And when we talk about assessing risk, it's not just about, risk from technology or how we use technology. There's data, there's privacy, because, threat actors, they want your data. And not only do they want your data, they want to sell it back to you at a high price. So look, when you're assessing risk, here are some questions that you may want to consider. So you're going to ask, what is our level of risk, both with technological safeguards and without? And as well, what's the potential impact of those risks? What data does our company handle? What types of data? Is it sensitive? Is it personal information, whatnot? And who's handling that data? You would be surprised that most organizations have no idea that they have an idea of what types of data they handle, but they really don't know who is handling it. And specifically, where is it stored, accessed, or handled? And is that risky? Look, if someone's handling, credit card information or personal health information, and they're storing it in Dropbox, but the corporate standard is SharePoint, well, guess what? That's an issue, and that's a risk. Also, you want to ask yourself, what's the company history when it comes to breaches and incidents? So don't think of like assessing risk or risk itself as like, data storage or fishes getting through. Think of them as behaviors. So the act of storing data in an unsafe place or someone clicking on a link, right? Because security awareness at the end of the day, as you no doubt know, is all about people. So once you've assessed risk and you've defined your top risks and potential behaviors to go with the risks, the next thing you need to assess is your targets. And this is the second part of the framework. We've assessed risk, and now we are going to assess targets. And when we're talking about targets, I'm referring to people who are the targets of the change. So the people ideally who have to change behaviors. So this recognizes that a one-size-fits-all approach isn't the way to go. So when it comes to assessing risk, there are a few questions you want to ask or consider, and they're the following. Who needs to change? And who may be impacted by our security awareness program? As well, what is their current level of knowledge in relation to security awareness or even the need to change? Is there an appetite for change? Is there change saturation in the company? I talked about this one before as well. Which targets, which people, which stakeholders handle what data? And of those groups that handle different types of data, which groups are high risk, which ones are low risk? Because that's going to inform your strategy as well. Also, when it comes to these stakeholder groups or these targets, how are they currently communicated with? But more importantly, how do they like to be communicated with? Think of whatever the company does and then try to do the opposite sometimes. So let me give you an example. If you're in an oil and gas, right? You might have people who work in the administrative offices, but you might have people work on the field. The people who are working on the field are going to need to be communicated differently than those who work in the offices. The problem is most organizations take a one-size-fits-all an approach when it comes to that. I think the last thing I put on here as well is avatar development. So this is something that I do with all my clients, but I generally don't see in most stakeholder assessments. And what that means is if I'm dealing with a specific demographic of a company and I really want to change their behavior, I want to get a lot of information about what they read, what they know, what they watch on TV, where they hang out, all that type of stuff, because it gives me a picture of how I should communicate with them. So let me give you an example. This is just a fake example just for the sake of this argument here, this point. So let's say I'm working with an organization, there's 100 people in one group. I may have created 2 avatars for that group. I'll call them Sam and Rena. And Sam and Rena, I created them based on my knowledge of those groups and maybe interviews with people in those groups and discussions. So Sam likes sports. I don't know, he doesn't really use the internet much, but he does watch Survivor and The Amazing Race. And then Rena loves to cook. She loves to go online, watch online cooking videos, and she can use YouTube, etc. So the point here is that the type of language I'm going to use, the technology I'm going to use, the approach I'm going to use is not going to be based specifically on what people think in a spreadsheet. It's on what I know. So when I'm communicating to that demographic, I think of my avatars, and I think I'm communicating to Sam and I'm communicating to Rena. So that is assess targets. So you've now assessed risk. You understand your audience a bit, and now it's time to develop the plan. And really, this is where we develop the initial roadmap and plan. So, this is going to include approaches for tactics, strategies, anything to minimize your top risks when it comes to human behavior. So in this part, yes, Patrick wrote in the chat, some of you might call these personas. Absolutely correct. So here, when we're talking about developing the plan, these are some of the questions I consider. What is our overall strategy? And as well, what are our goals? We need to define what success looks like, and not just from a metrics point of view, but what's the transformation that an individual needs to go through? We need to solidify and confirm the key behaviors we need to focus on based on our risks and understanding of our targets. As well, what are the applicable change streams? And when I'm talking about change streams, I'm saying, these are the pillars of your program sort of that you're going to execute on. Maybe we need a training stream. Maybe we need a communication stream, one for engagement. And often I have one for leadership development. As well, what are the reasons for the change? And I don't just mean from an organizational perspective, but for the individuals. Have you defined what's in it for them? And how do you handle resistance? Because this is going to come up. This is an important one here. How can we leverage leadership, sponsors, culture? Often one of my change streams is leadership development, because I really want to ensure that leaders walk the talk and lead by example. Because I spend a ton of time coaching leaders on not only how to bring security awareness into their groups, but also into their weekly meetings, into their dealings with employees and all that. And this one is a really, really important one. I'll put the graphic back up here. And it's the last one. How are we measuring the change? How are we measuring the change? So remember this. Individuals go through change very, very differently, right? Change is not an event. It's a process. So it's really important to measure where people are on the change journey, because that's going to tell you how to target your plans, your training, and all that. So let me give you an example. So I had a client I spoke to 2 years ago, and they were doing stuff on change, and they brought me into one of their employee events, and we were talking about change, and I brought two people on stage, and one was a smoker and the other was a not smoker. And we're talking about cigarettes here. So I said to the non-smoker, I said, look, I want you to change the other person's behavior. I'm going to give you 60 seconds. And in 60 seconds, you need to make this person a non-smoker, right? You need to change their behavior. I said, you think you can do it? Yeah, absolutely. No problem at all. So I said, okay, 60 seconds starting now, go. And of course, this is what I heard. Well, you got to quit smoking. Your breath's going to smell terrible. Your teeth are going to go yellow. You're going to have to get Viagra. You're going to be impotent. I literally heard that. You're going to get your skin's going to look bad, blah, blah, blah. So after 40 seconds, this person didn't have anything to say. I turned to the audience. The audience chimed in and sort of, they were saying, yeah, and you're going to die soon and you don't want to get cancer, and the typical things you hear. So I said to the person, the smoker, I said, all right, you heard some great things here. Has your perception or has anything changed for you? And he said, no, I'm not going to quit smoking. So I said, all right, let me try something. And I said, all right, do you know why smoking is bad for you? And he said, yeah, obviously. I said, okay, I'm just asking. And I said, all right, but do you want to quit smoking? He's like, no, I kind of enjoy it and it's relaxing and takes the stress out. I said, okay, fine. So you want to keep smoking. I said, but if you had to quit smoking, do you know what you would need to do? He's like, yeah, I'd go to the drugstore and I'd buy Nicorette gum or the patch or Zyban and so forth. I said, okay, you know what you need to do, but are you going to actually do it? He's like, no, me and my wife just bought a new house. Money's tight. So if I don't have to spend money, I won't. So I'm not saying I'm not going to do it, but probably not going to do something that's going to cost money. I said, okay. Let's say you quit smoking. What are the chances of you staying a non-smoker? He's like, well, we bought a new house. We haven't smoked in the house. My wife doesn't smoke. We have a baby on the way. Pretty good. My friends smoke, but I'm not going to see them much. I said, all right, fine. So I turned to the audience and I said, well, what's the difference between my approach? It's not really approach. And the first person's. And I said, well, you ask questions. I said, yes, but it's a little bit more than that. What I did was I sort of measured this person's change readiness by focusing on a process to go through change. And there's many out there. And I think BJ Fogg has his own process as well. The one I refer to, or I did in this example, was the ADKAR model. And ADKAR are 5 steps that individuals have to go through to really not just successfully change, but have it stick in place. And ADKAR stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement, right? Awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. So when I asked the first question, hey, you know what? Do you know why smoking is bad for you? He's like, yeah, I know why smoking is bad for you. So if I was going to rate him on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 is low, 5 is high for awareness, I'd give him a high. I'd give him a 5. And then I said, okay, but do you want to quit smoking? He's like, no, not really. So I gave him a 2. And then his knowledge, I said to him, all right, but do you know what you need to do to quit smoking? He's like, yeah, I need to get Zyban, get the patch. So he knew what he needed to do. So on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 is low, 5 is high, I gave him a 5. But they said, are you going to do it? No, money's tight. We just bought a house. I might, but I don't really think I will. 2. But then I said, what are the chances of you staying a non-smoker? And he says, well, we don't smoke in the house. It's new. I'm having a baby on the way. My friends smoke, so decent. So here's the thing. I rated his present change journey this way, all right, where 1 is low, 5 is high. So here's the interesting thing. What's the difference between my approach and the approach the first person took? Well, the first person solely focused on awareness, but guess what? His awareness was already high. It was almost a 4 or 5. So if I was going to do a change approach with him, what's the first area I would need to focus on? It would be desire, right? Because his awareness is high. I don't need to preach to the choir. And then once I bring his desire up, I would then focus on his ability, right? So my point is you need to sort of measure where people are on the journey. So that's really important when you're building your metrics as well. So you've now assessed risk, you've assessed targets, you've now developed the plan, and now you are going to engage and train, which is my favorite part because content is king at the end of the day. And content should address your risks, but also done in a way that aligns with really where people are in their change journey. So, you know, I bring people along on a journey with me, whatever I do in engagement, storytelling, whatnot. And there's tons of things you can do in security awareness when it comes to behavioral change. You know, micro e-learning modules, short little videos on different cybersecurity topics. Most of you guys run phishing campaigns. For a client this year, I instituted or created something called cyber moments. And similar to how oil and gas have safety moments, cyber moments are ahead of every single meeting in the company. The first minute is devoted to bringing awareness to a cybersecurity topic. So every month I have a different theme, and at the head of every meeting, someone will say like, hey, you know what, before the meeting begins, we're going to quickly talk about one thing you can do to keep an eye on phishing, or, you know, keeping an eye on not using peripheral devices. So I use cyber moments. There are security awareness events you can do. You know, there's Cybersecurity Awareness Month, which is in October. There's Safe Password Day. You can do role-based training based on tons of things. So there are tons of things you can do. One of the important things I love to do, which really helps changing behavior, is whatever I do for engagement, I always want to get my people to be active participants in the process. Less about passive recipients of change, more about people who then take the baton and champion it. And I do that by including them in a lot of the content and helping them generate a lot of the content itself. So in this phase, some of the questions you want to ask yourself are the following. How are we leveraging tools so we stand out? You know, how do we create aha moments? Are we solely focusing on logic? Can we use emotion? What are the specific actions we want people to take? What can we do to embed security awareness in our daily culture? What's in it for them? And then make sure we execute our plan based on the change journey. So that's engage and train. And finally, the last part in this framework, measure and evaluate. And this is about ensuring you have baseline data, but also that you're measuring what matters. So you guys know this, there's a million things you can measure. Phishing click rates, who is reporting phishing, all that kind of stuff. But this is also where you can really evaluate the effectiveness of your program because you're developing metrics early on in this framework and develop the plan. So this is where you can now look at them and say, we either need to course correct or really begin to celebrate success and reinforce and improve. And in this phase, some of the questions that you may ask are, what are important metrics for us? Have we established baselines? What behaviors have numbers behind them? You know, are there cultural metrics? Are there HR metrics? Where are we seeing pockets of resistance? And when you see that, it tells you, where do we need to focus more attention? Where are we succeeding and why? Why are people doing what they're doing? And of course, where are people on the change journey? Are people just at awareness? How we slowly move them to desire? Are they at ability? Because the change journey data also is going to tell you when to speed up and of course, when to slow down. So that's a quick overview of the CyberSafe Change Accelerator. And of course, in the center of the model, you have people, culture, and leadership. And what these are three levers that I use just to support the change effort. So that's the model that I wanted to sort of talk about during today's session. But as our time is sort of coming to a close, there's sort of one last thing I want to sort of ask you guys. I want you to take a look at this number. And in the next 30 seconds, okay, you can write on right here in the Slack channel. I want you to tell me if you see a pattern. All right. So take a look at this. Take a look at these numbers. And really, there's nothing remarkable about the number itself, but there's definitely a pattern here. Tell me how you see. Tell me if you see what the pattern is. I'm going to keep an eye on the Slack here. Phone number. Looks like a phone number. You guys must all be in an 854 area code. Phone number. All right. Look, I'll give you another hint. All right. Are you ready? Here's hint number 2. See if you can guess it now. All right, I'll give you the final hint. Here's the final hint. No, it's not song lyrics, Wendy, but good guess. All right, there's the final one. Here's the thing. If you haven't guessed it, these numbers are in an alphabetical pattern. They're alphabetical. So why did I use this? Because we are so conditioned to doing things a certain way. But sometimes, as which I tried to explain in the session, we need to look at things from a different perspective to really get us to where we need to go. To change the outcome, you have to change behaviors. That's it at the end of the day. So that's my time. I'm going to give a bit of time back so we can have some Q&A from Lance. And here's the thing. If you want to get the points for today's session, what you can do is you can go to my website, roboddi.com/sans. And following the session, in about 60 minutes, I will upload the video from the session there, but you'll get some of the points, the questions I use, and so forth. So you can go to roboddi.com/sans. And of course, following the session, I'd love to hear your comments and questions. So I will be active here in the next hour, like sitting here, going through the chat on Slack, and of course, throughout the rest of the summit. And again, the stuff is at roboddi.com/sans. Thank you so much. Sorry if I spoke too fast, but there's a lot of great content, and I'll pass this over to Lance, and we'll see if there's any questions or answers.
Yeah, lots of questions and lots of activity. Rob, that was awesome. I think you just totally outdid me. I've got to up my game on my presentation style. So congrats.
Thanks.
Folks, what I love the most about Rob's presentation is we've had lots of bits and pieces from the past couple of days. And you'll notice almost all the talks plugs into one of the 5 stages that Rob brought up. But Rob did a fantastic job of bringing it together. And when you brought ADKAR, oh, you just made my day. ADKAR, out of all those models out there, is probably my favorite. And in fact, one of the questions we have is about that model on desire. So back to your cigarette question, Renuka,
Yes.
Renuka asks, hey, just curious, how would you build desire? And it's not specific to your example, but just in general, how does one generate desire?
Yes. That's great. So really desire at the end of the day is what's in it for them, right? So what's the benefit of changing? If I change, what's in it for me? So if I think of desire from a security awareness point of view, most organizations are talking about desire from, we need to protect the organization and our livelihood and our profit and all this. Great, granted, fine. But what's in it for you? Why is it in your benefit to do this? So for security awareness, it's because not only are you going to be protected in the office, but this could be applied to your sort of home behaviors around connected technologies. You can protect your family and so forth. For smoking, that specific question you asked, the desire is what's in it for you? So all the reasons you should change, but do you know, like, for you to do it, it's going to benefit you in this way, or this is why you should do it. And that's what desire is about, is how to increase their interest level.
And then I see Nicole just pointed. Nicole, I would agree, but Nicole notes, hey, Simon Sinek's The Why.
Yeah, Simon Sinek's The Why. So I was chairperson for 2 years in a row for the Global Organization of Change Management Professionals, called ACMP. And we brought in Simon Sinek for one of our keynotes and the Golden Circle. And I think what amazed me was, because I've been doing this for so long, I'm like, wow, that's just so like obvious. But here's the great part. Most people don't think about the why. They don't. And I was actually glad that he wrote that book and did that, because now some people are saying, like, what is the why and how do we communicate it and how do we base on that why? Why are you doing security awareness? Right? So it's really important. I love Simon Sinek stuff.
And folks, I'm 110% with Rob on this one. And it's part of the curse of knowledge. So many of us are, from a security perspective, we get the why. And so the problem is, it's not that we're bad at communicating the why. It's a lot of times we don't even think about the why. We're going to do a password manager rollout. So we tell people what and how, but we forget to tell them the why, the benefit. So Rob, I was cheering. Nobody could hear because I was on mute. I was like, yes, yes.
I'm looking at the Slack, and Bernadette wrote, I have a big sign next to my monitor that says, what is in it for me? Bernadette, I have a sign next to my monitor that says, speak slowly. So we have two different signs, but we both have signs attached to our monitor.
And then you probably don't have time, Rob, to answer this one, but Robert Kinzer asks, how did you pull this off, this presentation? What's the technology you use?
Oh my God. Okay. So you know what? I will post a photo in, so you don't even want to know. Okay. Like, I don't know if I can show you here. So I will post a photo in the Slack channel. Once we're done here off the Zoom, I'll spend the next hour in there, and I'll post a photo so you can be kind of like, I know it runs like a bit of like a TV show, right? So, because I really want to make sure the stuff I do is engaging and so forth. But yeah, it's a big ordeal, but it's just me here. There's no one else here. There's no one behind the scenes. It's just me. But for the things that are showing the animations, I use something called the Stream Deck, but I'll talk more about this in the Slack channel if people want.
Yeah, what would be awesome is anything you could share, right up to it, links to hardware, because
Sure.
Robert, I'm interested too.
No problem.
All right, so hey, Rob, it looks like we're out of time, but that was mind-blowing. Folks, I'm 110% behind everything Rob just said. So if you didn't catch it all, watch the recording. Otherwise, Rob will catch you in Slack.
Thanks. I'll see you guys in Slack. Cheers.